Not too long ago we picked up this body with the main intent of using it as a donor to get body panels and the like to fix Truckstang 2. And after wrestling with it in my head, I decided can't do it. This thing's in too good a shape to cut up just to try to fix a rusty vehicle that I ain't gonna say is too far gone, but really isn't worthy of destroying a good specimen like that. So we're still gonna do Truckstang 2. It's just gonna be more rattier than it was or is. But we're gonna turn that thing into a regular car for all intents, and more than likely might even borrow some stuff off of the Truckstang 2 body, because, well, Truckstang 2 is a rat rod. This here can actually be put together to be something decently appealing. So yeah, go ahead and get started with that. For those that hadn't seen this thing already, we're starting off with a 71 Mustang base model set up for a V8, which we happen to have one in the garage, a 351, and a couple of C4 transmissions I could piece together to make one good transmission. But everything is pretty solid on here structurally, and even the body is not in bad a shape, save for some flaws. The rear quarter right here has a dent that has to be knocked out. The biggest part is this hit right here that's going to need to be knocked out, which might take a little bit of time because surprisingly that's actually heavy metal. But the doors are all solid, in good shape and complete, save for an interior panel. Like I say, that fender there is kind of ugly, but it's there. Hood's in good shape. Core support's going to need to be straightened out because, well, it looks like somebody was yanking on that thing enough times to distort it. Not too big of a deal, nothing that a sledgehammer can't fix. Got our complete wiring harness front to back that we can at least only have to do a minimal amount of splicing in to get to all the different components. Interior's in good shape just as well, floor wise. I mean, there's minor rust, but it's not horrifying like the Truckstang 2 body is. I have the gauge cluster and other little panels that go in the dash frame. Even have a couple of seats. One of the things I did think about doing, because I wanted to do the whole ute concept with an old Mustang, that's going to probably be the plan here just as well, just like with Truckstang 2. Hacking out that panel and removing that rear window and putting a truck bed in there, which we do have a spare S10 truck bed, the floor part at least, that I could cut up to make the floor to go in there. But unlike Truckstang 2, this panel is going to remain. It won't be turned into a tailgate because I do have taillight panels. They're not the best of shape, but until we get some replacements, they'll just have to work. We also have our rear bumper and rear valence panel. Bumper needs to be straightened out because of that damage right there, but the valence panel is in good shape. But once we get that taken care of, we could start reassembling the rear. Even have a good gas tank to it, surprisingly. But in the meantime, grab some tools and start smashing some metal out. So as usual, stand by. All right, after a bunch of beating using a small sledge and our big sledgehammer, I was able to get everything at least knocked straight enough out where our taillight housing should fit pretty good. Obviously I'm gonna have to do some more detailed surgery in this area right here, and probably put a little mud in some of these little rougher spots just to fill all this crap in. But I had to straighten out this area right here where the bumper would sit, so that would at least sit kind of straight, as well as our quarter end cap whenever we find one. A shot from the inside just shows how crinkly the metal is, and of course me beating the crap out of it didn't help matters, but we're not concerned about how that looks. We're more concerned about how we can get that to look. But all things considered, it's actually straightened out pretty well for us to continue to do more detailed work. Another area to look at, the area at the front of this quarter panel, I managed to get that large dent straightened out fairly well. In order to do that, I had to pull out the whole window regulator and everything so I could get this area opened up here in order to use a 2x4 and a big ass screwdriver along with the baby sledgehammer to carefully work out sections of that dent enough so that it's not as visible as it was. Obviously, I'm not going to get it completely perfect, but it's good enough here where I can at least prep the metal and put a little bit of mud on there in order to help level that area off. So with all that said and done, I'll go ahead and put all that trash back in there, which was fun to get out. So give me a minute and let me refigure how to do all that, because yeah, we did it on the fly. So stand by. All right, we have our window regulator and glass and everything put back in, and because of me taking everything apart and greasing everything up, the window can actually crank up and down. Of course, I have to get a handle for that though. But with that all said and done, all the beading on the quarter panel and everything actually straightened out this section enough to allow that door to close a little smoother and be nice and flush against the body. So that was another win. I also took a moment to persuade that core support to straighten itself out a little bit, so we won't have to worry about that anymore either. Next on the list, I'm going to go and put that valence panel and bumper in place here. That bumper is actually the one that used to be on the Truckstang body, 73 model bumper that has the vertical pieces on there, so it's slightly different, but it's straighter. So I'm going to use that on there. Plus that bumper with those vertical pieces on there wouldn't really fit all too well on the Truckstang body with the tailgate and all. So I'm going to go ahead and start bolting all this garbage back together. Might have to weld that valence panel in place, or at least put a couple of tack welds on the sides, because the little tabs that were also spot welded in were really in bad shape. One of the things that was in bad shape on here. Stand by. Found an interesting discovery. The way that's looking, that looks like a 9-inch rear end on there. This chassis came with a 9-inch rear end. Supposed to be one of the weaker ones that were available, the ones that were in Mustangs, but hey, it's a 9-inch rear end. That's cool. That gives you a little more options when it comes to how much power you might want to throw into this thing, and if for no other reason, the damn things are a little more durable than lighter rear ends. But yeah, that's cool. Next on the list, we have our rear valence panel back in place. The little tabs that were on the inside were rusty and had to be broken because there was no other way to see to get them loose. But along the top, sheet metal screws were used just as it was stock to attach the panel in place. I just took the liberty of drilling a hole at the corner right there on each side to be able to put one long sheet metal screw on either side to hold the bottom corners in place, so our valence panel is straight. The other thing is putting our bumper on. That bumper there was distorted, to say the least, so I'm gonna have to beat on that thing to straighten it back out before I hang it. I did have the other bumper from the 73 Mustang, aka Truckstang 2, but the brackets on there are actually bigger, where if I use that bumper on there, the bumper's going to be sticking out and it's going to look kind of goofy. So we're not going to use that bumper. And as far as the brackets, because all those bolts are kind of rusty, I'm not even going to play around trying to get that garbage loose. So we're just going to go ahead, straighten that out, get that sucker bolted up so we can complete the lower rear part of that. Then I can look at our taillight panels. Stand by. All right, we have our bumper mounted. I was able to straighten it out as best as I could with the available tools, so it's straight enough to sit in place like I need it to. So with that all said and done, taillight time. Okay, we have our taillight housings in place. These things were kind of boogered up, mainly where the mounting tabs are at. This one only had one tab broken, and the plastic is just kind of ratty looking. But I had to improvise there with a piece of metal held in place just to kind of hold it down right there. The worst one is this one. Both of the top tabs are broken off, and I ended up doing the same thing with a strip of metal right here and added a couple of wood screws right here to help hold the thing in place. Not perfect, but at least they're held in, so we'll be able to go ahead and at least roll with some tail lights until I could get some replacements that can mount in there properly. The next order of business is going to be the ute conversion part. Now, a couple ways I could have done that. I could try to find every spot weld on these sections of metal right here, as well as our sections in there, which I could probably still do for right there because they're perfectly visible. But then there's also going to be some hacking where I'm just cutting at different seams, such as right here and even along this point right here up to about right there, and same on that side, so I can at least get this whole section out as well as the window, and then go ahead and work on the whole setup as far as doing our bed thing. We're really shooting from the hip as we typically do here, so there might be a sudden change in the plan, but we will see when we get there. So let me get all my tools ready. Got to get a grinder and a sawzall or reciprocating saw and get to work. Stand by. The vehicular carnage is complete. I hacked out the trunk area section right there. Next plan is going to be to take our S10 bed or floor of the bed and measure and cut a section to cover this whole area and a little bit extending over the front there. Then the next plan will be to use some sheet metal to fabricate a panel going around here to simulate the rear of the trunk lid to maintain these straight lines all the way across. I'll also cut a piece of sheet metal to attach to that so we can cover up this whole rear section right here where the tail lights are at, so anything that's being carried in here doesn't slide around and bang against the tail light panel or the tail light housings. Once all the bed stuff is done, then we're going to make a couple of panels, straight panels for either side there to cover up these empty spaces right here. My plan is going to be to try to make those panels be removable, so more than likely they're going to be attached with bolts or something. Well, I'll figure that out as I move along. And then lastly, I'll figure out some type of back window section for that. But it's still early and we still got more off the hip planning to do, so let me go ahead and deal with the S10 bed first. All right, we took our S10 bed floor section that we salvaged, and after a bunch of measuring all across the thing, side to side, front to back, this is what I came up with for our floor to match the contours of the quarter panels as well as the dimensions between the tire wells and a projected depth of the bed going into the cab area. I might still end up trimming some off, maybe not. All right, here's what we came up with. On the rear here, cut a large piece of sheet metal and manipulated it to simulate the rearmost part of the trunk lid and welded it at the top there and there. Got a piece of conduit welded along the bottom right there to help stiffen this thing. Probably going to do the same thing right there, even though I kind of worked a little lip around the front there, but I want a little more rigidity to that. And that little lip there is going to be for when I make my panel to go right here to cover the taillight section, as well as our fuel filler tube, which I also accommodated with that notched out section. As for our bed, we got 4 bolts holding it in so far. Got 2 of them right there, and then another one there and there, going through the floor and being held in with 3/8 bolts with lock nuts on them. Another thing we had to address were the access holes for the rear shocks, because with the bed in place, we would not have been able to get to those points to change the shocks out. So I had to cut those holes right there in order to access the access holes for the shocks on the rear shock tower. Have to figure out something to go over those holes so they're not just hanging wide open like that. But yeah, we'll figure out something, even if it's something as simple as a piece of sheet metal with self-tapping screws holding it in there. We'll come up with something. As for the sides here, these leftover sections of tire well had to be left in place because there's about a good inch section right there that would have been left hanging wide open had I cut all that out. But when we get the sheet metal in here to fill in these areas, we can go ahead and just link up with that metal right there and just kind of blend it all in. More than likely, I'm probably going to be knocking out about a foot of the front of the bed right there because it's almost at the rear point of the doors, and I wanted to at least have some of that rear seat area open for internal storage, especially if I do get a panel set up to block out or divide the cab from the bed itself. But progress is being made, so I'm going to continue with the cutting and stuff so we can wrap this up. All right, update on this. Actually had a change of plan in how I'm going to actually implement this whole ute setup. After looking at it when I trimmed the front of the S10 bed floor, I looked at it, and with the cost of a few more inches of floor, I could actually put this structural member back in place that would allow me to actually put our back seat in there and still have a good, I think it's about 3.5, 4 feet of bed right there to utilize. So I went ahead and cut that support piece and welded it back in. So we're going to actually be a 2+2 once again on this car, as well as have our pickup bed set up. Another thing that I'm going to do as far as actually finishing out the bed area, got some small angle iron pieces that I'm going to weld in place like this, so we can have a good straight line going from front to back on both sides, and then around that I could build up the metal to fill in these dead spaces right here, as well as panels going straight down to the bed, so we could link that up. And then the bed that I used, the bed that I chopped out from the front, I'm going to utilize that to fill in this area right here to enclose the whole thing in. So we'll be able to conclude that part of it. Then all that'll be left is figuring out what we're going to do about the back window area. So still also have to get our panel done right here, but I won't be able to get that done until after I get all this stuff done on the sides. So let's continue. All right, this is what we came up with on our side setup. Put the angle iron pieces in here. Well, you can see that raw piece right there, but same thing right there. Took a piece of sheet metal, cut it to fit, and we have it welded along the bottom, and it's welded to the angle iron at these spots right here. The angle iron is not at the very top. It's actually about right there, as you can see those burn spots. And to fill in the top, I cut a piece of sheet metal from the metal that I cut from out of there and cut it to fit, and then welded that in place along this whole seam going around, and took time to make sure I had a lip on this piece of metal so I could weld it along the bottom, well, kind of on the side here instead of at the very corner. And then inside there it's kind of filled in just as well. Now I ground it down to smooth it out as much as possible so I could come on top of this later with some mud to help try to level this garbage off, so it can at least look somewhat blended in. So with this side all done, I could go ahead, get the other side done, and then we can go ahead and do our panel to go across the back here and get all that set up, taking into account some access holes so we could be able to reach our tail lights and everything, and wrap it up with the panel going across the front of the bed or the back of the back seat area, however you want to look at it. So let me continue my cutting and grinding and all that good stuff. This is what we came up with for our pickup bed. It's an actual box, straight on all 4 sides. So got our panels here and here. Right here we welded back in the framework for the rear seat, and after cutting off the bed in order to do that, used a piece of that bed panel to create that wall right there. I'll have to finish a little bit of welding around these points here and then come on top of that with some type of sealing caulk or tar substance or whatever might be recommended for that. As well as with the straight sides here, this dead space here had to be filled in with these sheet metal triangular panels that I had to cut. And I smoothed the welds down as best as possible because later on I'm going to come on top of all this with some Bondo to help smooth all this out so it at least kind of blends in with the rest of the body. As far as the rear portion, I made a panel right here out of more of the bed material that's actually removable. Got a line of sheet metal screws along the top because this panel tucks up under that lip right there, and a line of sheet metal screws along the bottom, so this whole panel can come out in order to allow me to change taillight bulbs or even remove the taillight housings if need be. So with all this done, go ahead and clean this bed up some, and then we can start looking at how we're going to fill in this area for our cab divider, panel, wall, whatever, as well as some kind of window to go in here to close that in so we can move on with completing our ute conversion. So let me do a little brainstorming and see what I can come up with based on what I have available. Stand by. As an added bonus, I test fitted the rear portion of our rear seat just to make sure that everything would sit right. It's hooked in place, and there's a nice little gap between the back of the seat panel and our back of our, or back front of our bed. So whenever I do our divider, I can just come right over here, probably put a piece of angle iron or something if I got it, along the top here as a building point, and then come straight up from there. But we're able to put our back seat in without it overlapping in any way where it'll interfere. So that's a good thing. As an added bonus, we took a moment to move the old donor car into the compound area. Had to move Truckstang 2 back into that open dead space right there so we can make room for this one. So now we're better able to work inside the confines of our little fenced in area. Back to work. All right, we have our window frame here done. Nice little rectangular opening. This was pretty much made with a couple pieces of angle iron on either side and a couple of strips of flat stock along the top and bottom. And on the sides here, I cut some sheet metal and bent it on this side, welding it all in place to fill in this opening here. And this is made up from 2 pieces of sheet metal that are cut and welded together with all the welds ground down to smooth it all out as much as possible. On the inside, this seam right here actually has another piece of flat stock welded between here and the body right there to help stiffen it enough so when I cut and welded in these 2 pieces of sheet metal right here, it helps fill in this whole area right there. And as you can see, I ground that all down just as well. Later on, I'm going to have to come back on top of that with some Bondo to help smooth a lot of this stuff out. So when I do put some paint on here, it'll at least make all the lines look a little more seamless, I guess. But on the same token, I took a moment to add a little access panel right there by cutting out that little notch and then cutting another piece of sheet metal and making it a little bit bigger so I could put the sheet metal screws around the edges so that panel can be removed if I need to do anything in this area here, similar to that right there. As far as our window, we're going to do just like we did on the 51 and use a piece of Lexan plastic glass to fill in this area. We already have the panel cut. The plan is to get some black window tar caulk, I don't know what the hell you call it, but it's made for holding windshields in. Some pretty strong thick stuff, and I'm just going to apply a bead of it around the inside of the window frame so I could just slap that piece of plexiglass Lexan in place over that window frame. Chose to do it on the inside versus the outside because it'll just look a lot cleaner from the outside if it's done that way. And then at least once that's done, we'll at least have the cab closed in. And we could start focusing on other things later on down the line. But let me go ahead and get the Lexan in place. Alright, here's what we came up with. After measuring and cutting our plexiglass, I went ahead and used a couple different adhesives. I didn't want to use the regular stuff for windshields because that stuff is super strong and that would be overkill if I ever had a need to remove this stuff. But I got some other stuff that's pretty good. Expensive, but I applied a bead of the stuff around the inside of the window frame in order to apply the plexiglass to the frame and get a nice good coupling of the plexiglass to the metal. And then after letting that sit a while, I had another adhesive that I used that was a little bit more liquidy that I used to fill the gaps along the bottom right there, and then some thicker roofing tar like stuff in a caulk tube that I used to fill around the upper portion right there and even on the sides. So really it's a combination of crap that's in there, but the whole point is I wanted to get that plexiglass glued down and sealed up around the gaps between the plastic and the metal so there isn't any retaining water in there. But go on to the inside real quick. On the inside you could see the big blob of adhesive that was smashed between the plexiglass and the metal frame, as well as some black tarry stuff, which is kind of hard to see, but it is there. So the window is in. I also took a second to fit the back seat to make sure that it was still going to sit in there like it needs to, which it does. So we're good on that end as well. So with that all said and done, we can pretty much say that our ute conversion is done, other than going over the different weld joints and seams with some Bondo to help smooth out the body lines and cover up the weld joints and everything, as well as putting something around these seams here and whatnot to help clean that up, and probably throwing some kind of bed liner in here as well to just cover all this stuff up and protect it. We could say we're all good and ready to go. One last thing that I forgot to mention, I did take a moment to drill a couple of drainage holes at the lower points on our bed here, because even though this bed is kind of distorted, it does pool water in a couple of spots where I pointed out, and that water is able to run down over the floor and down through the bottom, where I have a couple more drain holes on either side. And it is still kind of open at the back right here too, where our fuel tube goes through the floor. So I wanted to ensure that there are plenty of drainage spots available, so any water that does collect in here immediately runs down and out and does not sit, allowing everything to rust further. But again, we're pretty much done for right now. So in the next go around, we're going to probably come back to the body work again and maybe do some little touching up with the rear here. But until the next time, as usual, like, subscribe, notifications, TikTok, all that good stuff. Stand by for the next round of work on this car, and Lord knows what else I feel like working on. Depends. Kind of an ADD thing going on. I bounce all over the place based on what I have available. But I'm done talking. I'll catch you later. I'm out.